We'll be going in just a second.
Brian, while we wait for people to get on, you had mentioned what's going on in the real estate market. I'm sitting here in Northwest Crossing. I can see Discovery Park, which was just developed a couple of years ago. I see stuff happening with Discovery West up on the ridge. And I'm looking at an empty lot right across the parking lot here. As you know, is going to be 32 high-end condos that we'll have coming here at a rate over in that new Grove complex. So it's kind of fun to be talking about what's happening in real estate and witnessing it firsthand right out the window.
Yeah, I love it. That's a beautiful new building you're in, and that's going to be a really fun one. So we've got those condos that are coming out, same developer that did the base camp project down near the river, down near Colorado Street, right down near the Whitewater Park. And they're bringing on some very modern flats, loft style units right behind that new assembly hall right in Northwest Crossing where all those food vendors are. So if you haven't been there yet, go. It's a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and get started. So everybody, thank you for joining us today. I'm Brian Ladd, principal broker at Cascade Sotheby's Realty. I'm joined by Steve LaCrosse, who's also a principal broker over at Cascade Sotheby's. And we like to do this about every month or so to get a good, to have a thorough review of what we're seeing happening on the ground in real estate here in Bend, Oregon. There's a lot of headlines. There's a lot of national news. It's continuing to be a dynamic time. It's continuing to be a scary time for some. And we think that really getting deep into the data and tell you not only what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, but what we're seeing in a macro scale, even kind of lending into national economic discussions, helps inform our clients to get a sense of security and understanding what's happening in real estate. So Jamie, did you share the results of those polls? It looks like you did. I think let's start right there. The first question that we did is said, do you feel confident in your understanding of the forces driving the housing market? And more of you are somewhat that you have a basic understanding, and a lot of you are quite confident. That reassures me because there's a lot of people that really don't understand the driving factors behind housing and housing prices and housing cycles. So it's good. We have none of you that are not sure of what understands or that don't understand what moves the market. That's reassuring to me. And then the primary emotions that you associate with your housing situation in Bend, very optimistic. The highest one that you guys selected was sense of opportunity, confidence, happiness, security. But then there's quite a few answers here in insecurity, fear, disappointment as well. So it's a mixed market. Jamie, thank you for sharing those with us. And it's a very dynamic time, and I look forward to getting into that today. So before we start, what I'm going to also do is I want to invite everybody. Let me go to my screen here. We are helping host. This is a project that I've worked to create over the last 2 or 3 years. The chamber is now involved, called Bend 101. This is an event that we're going to be hosting at the Tetherow Pavilion on April 12th. And this is going to be a quarterly event. And we're very excited about this. What this is really aimed at is welcoming those that are newer to town, kind of getting past becoming just citizens in town, but becoming, engaged residents and helping give back, help understanding that the issues that we have here with housing affordability or problem of affordability, homelessness, all the things that, kind of once you lift the covers and get to understand the whole Bend picture, you understand that you have to get involved. And so this is a really exciting event. And if you want to register, you go to bend101.org, or if you want to join, you can be our guest. We'll cover your ticket. If you just want to put it in the chat function to say I'm in, and we'll reach out to you directly and we'll make sure you have tickets for this event. I can't give away this whole video. It's supposed to be private, but I'm going to show the first 30 seconds to kind of give the theme and the understanding what we're shooting for.
Ah, yes, you've made it. You've envisioned it. You've dreamt about it. And through thick and thin, roadways and bikeways. Hey man, we're filming here.
I was just wondering, is there a brewery around here somewhere?
Look, it's not just the 300 plus days of sunshine.
Is this from Ben?
or the world-class recreation. Bend is rich in culture, community, and also kindness. We wave to our neighbors, stop for pedestrians, and lend a hand to those in need.
So I'm going to stop it there. We're very excited about this event, and we think it's going to address head on what it means to be a Bend citizen and how to get materially involved. So sorry about the promotion on that. Excuse me. I'm very excited about that. So Steve, let's get to the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today. And we promised to talk about a couple big things, and let's start with inflation.
Yeah, so it comes up a lot. We hear it all the time. People are concerned. They hear inflation in the news, and they're concerned about housing prices having gone up so much and continuing to go up. And what does that mean with inflation? So we thought we'd just start with a pretty basic definition of inflation is a general increase of the costs of goods and services and a decrease in the purchasing power of money, right? So it's a natural thing that we see. We actually have another slide coming up and a few slides to kind of go through what that has looked like over the last few decades. But basically, the costs are going up, things cost a little bit more, and people are looking to do things to try to protect their investments and protect their money in a time where your dollar doesn't go quite as far. And so, Brian, do you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, so sure. So Lawrence White, professor of economics at New York University, said the way he defines it and connects it to housing is he said that inflation exacerbates the housing demand supply imbalance. And I'm going to, as a side note, housing is really a product of supply and demand. There's a lot of ancillary things that affect it. Mortgage rates, the overall economy, the stock market, et cetera, financial policy, but it really is underpinned by basic supply and demand. So to get back to that, which means higher pricing for housing. People think I need a hedge against inflation, and housing has traditionally been a long-lived durable asset. Why are we talking about economics? Because we're in an inflationary cycle, many of which have never really experienced in their lifetime, and it directly affects housing. So I think it's important to talk about. And even people like Elon Musk, who 2 years ago sold his house and moved into a mini house, is now saying, hey, it's a crazy time with inflation, and it's good to own physical things like residential real estate. And so I'm not going to go all in and saying that Elon Musk understands our industry, but when the purveyor of Dogecoin or Dogcoin or whatever is talking about housing and physical things being a good asset to hold during this cycle that we're going into, I think it bears paying attention to. And so, Steve, you want to jump in here?
We're entering this inflationary time. We've experienced inflation for decades, for as long as any of us can remember. That's why we have our grandparents saying the movies were a nickel and you'd have a soda for a penny and all of that. So if you look back, 1991, $100 in 1991 is the equivalent of 208 today. So if you made a $100 investment back in 1991, you'd like for it to be worth $208 today. If we look back on housing prices since 1991, that's gone up 258%. So even though the value of your dollar has gone down over those 30 years, having your money in an asset like housing has way outperformed what has way outperformed what the dollar has done over that same period of time. So it is a protection in times of inflation, and I think we need to get that across, that people can understand that when inflation is happening, people should be putting their money in things that can hold their value and outpace it. And in the case of housing, it did it by more than 150%.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too wonky in the weeds, but I really feel that this inflationary cycle started at the beginning of the pandemic, but a lot of people didn't see it. And it started squarely in housing. And a lot of it had to do with the fiscal policy and the bailouts and the low interest rate and all that correlation. And in February, we were preaching from the rooftops, and there was not many other people speaking, where we were saying housing is going to be a very strongly performing asset in the next couple of years. And a lot of people had a fear in that time. And granted, it was a brand new time in February 2020 with the start of the pandemic. But I believe that housing really led the inflation bubble, but it didn't show up in the CPI index. And now I'm getting a little wonky, but I believe it's here and everyone's seen it now. But there's a lot of things that go into inflationary pressures on housing. And let's discuss a few of them here. One of them was just the financial aid and fiscal policy. There was a lot of money in the system. You combine that with fewer workers. There's a lot less people physically working. There's a lot of people that have moved out of the workforce. They're working part-time jobs. They're working gig jobs. There's not the contractor base. So the cost of construction, the cost of labor has gone up. The material cost, we did a webinar on this, what was that, in December, where we showed a 250% increase in a lot of the materials that went into housing. We're continuing to see that as well. And that really came from disruption of cycles, supply chain. Log mills were shut down, steel mills were shut down, et cetera, during the pandemic. And they're having trouble firing them back up because there's fewer workers. So we're seeing a lot of costs there. Lower interest rates. Lower interest rate put a lot more money into the system. A lot of people had more access to affordable capital to buy these homes. Lack of land. This is a big one. The regulations and zoning on land have really limited the amount of land that is being brought into the system. For good or for bad, there's a lot of opinions on that, and that's driving up the cost. We add the remote work and the migration trends that we've seen the last number of years, and a 10-year undersupply in housing, both here and nationally. And it helps explain those inflationary pressures that we've seen on housing. And the reason I'm calling it inflationary pressure on prices rather than housing bubble is because this one is very different. This isn't a speculative housing bubble. This is the asset class that has taken on the brunt of most of the inflation that we're seeing in the market. Steve, do you want to take a crack and talk about these mortgage rates as well?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think for a little while here, the last couple of years, we've gotten used to interest rates going down, and some of us remember 5%, 6%. Then it went down into the 4s and the 3s, and a number of clients were able to get it below 3 in the 2s. And so we've seen that tick back up since the beginning of the year. I think it's gone up about 3/4 of a point. In the last couple of weeks, it's bounced around between 3.5 and 4, and sometimes over 4. But I think it's good to look at it from a much bigger perspective. You can see it on this chart, what it looks like over the last number of years. But if we go into the next slide, you can really see the big picture of where these rates are in comparison to where they have been. They've been in the double digits before, and so they're still at a good level. And it does beg the question: what does rising interest rates? What does that mean? Does that keep people on the sidelines because they're afraid it's going to bump them out? And yeah, the answer, unfortunately, for the most price susceptible buyers is that small changes in interest rate can make a difference. I would suggest talking with your lender. There are certainly options and things that you can do to restructure a loan and have different programs. But generally speaking, we're also seeing some of the opposite. To the people that know this cycle and know that interest rates can go up much higher than what we've been used to, it's getting people off the fence, and they're saying, I'd rather lock it in the high 3s than in the high 4s. And so high interest rates don't necessarily mean it's going to keep people on the sidelines or it's going to cause buying to stop. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to drive people in. And so it's certainly one of the metrics that we're continuing to watch. But certainly, like we say all the time, we're not the experts on mortgage rates. You should talk to your preferred lender, and they can help you through what this means for you in particular.
Yeah, but I just want to keep in a macro sense, put this in perspective in the sense that for those that have really just only pictured the last 2 years of interest rates, which was the lowest interest rate environment really in the history of the US, as far as a relevant history, let's say 1940s on for us. And when we look even at this chart, which goes back into the 1970s when I was born, the average interest rate was about 7-8% over that time. And we got used to this 2.75, 3% interest rate world during the pandemic, but that really had to do with the fiscal policy and the bailout that we had because of the pandemic. And as we sit today at 4.25%, to lock in money, mortgage rates as a buyer at 4%, historically is a sound move. So just because we missed out on interest rates at 3.25% doesn't mean that it's bad money to go get a mortgage at 4.25%, which I think we're at right now, aren't we? Just over 4.
Yeah, I mean it's right in that range. It's one day it's just below 4, another day it's just over 4. So we're definitely right in there.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
oh, it's just another poll pop up.
Yeah,
So I'll
and
take
speaking
this
of
one.
which, I think Jamie shared the results of that poll. The majority of you, about 75%, had interest rates at or below 3.5%, which tells me that it's going to cause less homes to become available than we hope, because a lot of us in the industry are saying we have a lack of inventory. We're going to get to that right now. But when there's a lot of people that are locked into those low rates, people are reluctant to sell those homes. So I think that the normal churn of homes coming on the market could be delayed in a rising interest rate environment, which we're going to be in for the next couple of years. So, it's another hit that we have against inventory. And Steve, do you want to address kind of where we stand with inventory right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this month is months of supply. So I know we've talked about it before. You'll hear it sometimes. Months of supply is how long would it take to work through the existing inventory given the pace at which houses are selling. And so the chart we're looking at here takes a wide range of the Bend market, and it looks like about 2 months of inventory. When you go down to a tighter level and you look at the non-acreage residential properties, it's closer to about a half a month's worth of inventory. And so, what we say is a balanced market is about 6 months of inventory. If we have anything more than 6 months, we've got a buyer's market. We've got a market where buyers can come in, can negotiate a little bit more. There's a lot of homes for sale and sellers know that. They're a little bit more in the driver's seat. Everything under 6 months, which clearly at somewhere between a half a month and 2 months, we're certainly in a seller's market. And so, it's also worth noting, we were doing our newsletter just the other day and we were pulling some data for that. And this February was the first time in, as far as we could tell, we went back over a decade, where there were fewer homes on the market in February than there were in January. Normally, we hit our low in December and we gradually have more homes come on the market and available for sale all the way into the summer before it starts to taper off again. And so, to your point, Brian, there are a number of reasons why maybe some of those homes aren't coming back on the market or haven't come back on so quickly, but we are definitely in a very tight inventory market. This is one of the reasons why. I don't know if you want to jump in and talk about how long these houses are staying on the market.
Yeah, so that poll that we just did, it was unanimous. 100% of you said there's fewer homes on the market. So I don't think that it's up for discussion that there's not much to choose from out there right now. But what the segue is how those homes are selling, because there's so few on the market. Buyer demand is strong. The median days on market right now is 11. Kind of depends which data set you use. Some say 4 or 5 days, some say 11. It kind of depends on, are we just single family homes on residential lots? Are we doing acreage, et cetera? But 11 is extremely quick. But what I also want to talk about is the average days on market is 35. And now, without getting too wonky into the details, median means half the homes below that number sell and half the homes sell above that number. The reason average is so high is what we're seeing is that appropriately priced homes are selling very quickly in the matter of days. But these buyers are more sophisticated. And what this is not right now, like it was in, let's say, middle of 2020, an irrational market. This is, buyers are educated, they can pay what they can pay, and they're not overreaching. As crazy as you may hear in the news about multiple offers, things like that, if it's an appropriately priced house, it's selling right away. But for the sellers that are saying, it just takes one offer and they throw it out there at a price that's not sustainable or supported by the market, they're not selling. So if the average is 35 days and you can put everything in there, there's a lot of homes that are sitting on the market 4, 5, 6 months without offers. So, the buyers are more educated right now, and it's not quite, there's not a rational frenzy in the market. Steve, would you agree with that synopsis of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like starting to look into the data a little bit more than just the number that was quoted. What's the median look like? What's the average look like? How do those two compare? The next slide kind of goes in a little bit further with the list to sales price. So, we have heard lots of discussions of prices going over asking, those quicker sales like Brian was talking about, just a couple days on market. There are definitely ones that are going at over asking. In general, that median home price or the median list to sales ratio is 100%. So
which means that just means if a house comes on the market, it sells at the asking price.
Yep, that is the the median is 100% right now. Seller puts it on the market, and that the vast majority of those are taking place right at list price. The stories that you hear are there are a few, and there are some that either were underpriced or created a frenzy for some reason, causing that average to be much higher. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of them are going right at list price. There are some that are pulling that average higher, but what the median is doing is it's telling us most of the homes are selling at list price, and it really isn't that overwhelming frenzy that we did see last year, where both median and average were well over list price.
Okay, and so what has this resulted in? This has resulted in above average appreciation. Last year, Oregon was up 18% in 1 year. But misery loves company, right? And for all those that are saying, hey, we're the only town that's dealing with this, we're doing everything wrong, woe is us, blame city council, pick your poison, pick the person you want to aim your anger and insecurity at. But everyone's dealing with this. If we go across in Idaho, they were up 27%, California 20%, Washington 20%, Nevada 23%. There's very few states in the Western United States that saw home prices increase less than Oregon in general. And let's go to 5 years, 57% in 5 years. That's painful for those that are on the outside of the housing market. This is a big barrier to entry. But look at Idaho. Idaho is up 120% in that same time period. So over 2 times the rate of appreciation that we're seeing. Utah 91%, Arizona, et cetera, et cetera. So the only reason I'm sharing that data is to kind of put it in perspective that we're not the only town, we're not the only state that's dealing with this. But let's talk very specifically about Bend. Do you want to talk about this one, Steve?
Yeah. So this shows we're up 25% in the course of a year. And in comparison to what Brian was showing, the state of Oregon, I believe was up 18%. We're up a little bit higher. And so when we do look at some of those state and national averages, Bend is an attractive spot. It's one of the destinations that has been on people's radar, and this has certainly escalated things. And so we've seen a 25% bump. The median price now is right over 700 at 720, which is, it's hard to believe sometimes when you get used to certain numbers and you see 720 as the median. Again, one thing we do look at, that was a pretty big bump. It was about an 8% jump just month over month from January into February, where that 720 came in. But we did see a number of homes on that upper end sell in the month of February compared to some more introductory level prices. And so there could be a little bit of an anomaly in there that pulled that just a little bit higher than it probably should have been. It doesn't necessarily mean the market appreciated 8% last month, but it does show that some higher end properties are definitely selling and pulling that higher.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you for addressing that. Now, where all this goes, and I'm just going to address the elephant in the room, but these next couple slides about housing bubble could be a webinar in and of itself, and we've done this, right? But I think a lot of us naturally equate high housing prices to a bubble. And I am not an eternal optimist on anything. But I think it begs the question to talk about what is a housing bubble, how does it exist, and what defines a housing bubble. So in the question, only about 10% of you think that we're in a housing bubble. That's reassuring to me because the data, we've got a really educated set here on the webinar. This is wonderful. A lot of people see a high price and immediately connect it to a housing bubble because everyone says, I've seen this before. I was here in 2007. I've seen this play. I know how it plays out. But when you start drawing parallels between the early 2000s and now, there's not many parallels to be drawn. And there's a lot of factors. And the other question that we did, and Jamie, can you share the results of that? The pricing, well, when I said, how would you most accurately define a housing bubble? A lot of you, the majority of you put unsustainable appreciation, speculative buyers, risky loans. Those are good things. So I think the unsustainable appreciation, I probably should have given a different term to that. But the primary things that undermine housing appreciation over time. And let me just stop here real quick. I don't believe that continued high appreciation is good for any market. I don't think it's good for owners. I don't think it's good for a town. So I have no skin in the game of wanting prices to go up. I like normalcy. I think people can make wise housing decisions in normalcy, and housing affordability is a foundation to a strong town. So that aside, a lot of the things that you're identifying are accurate. And let's talk about that. So I'm putting up a slide here just to kind of bear it because we need to talk about it. 77% of consumers in the market think that worries of a housing bubble exist, and 44% of agents think that that exists. I'm not going to say 77% of consumers and half of agents are wrong. What I'm going to say is that we need to get beyond the headlines and we need to talk about the data so that we can make wise decisions, because I don't believe the experts or the data support that sentiment. So the primary factor behind a housing bubble and a housing bubble pop, a housing bubble is defined as something that can come undone quickly, is risky loans, speculative buyers. So this graph here that we put together shows the volume and loans in billions across the US for people that had a credit score sub 20. If you go back to the early 2000s, anyone could get a loan. Anyone could get a loan at 90%, 95%, 100%. So they were putting almost no skin in the game. And there was a lot of speculative buying going on, a lot of lending going on to people that couldn't afford it. And all it took was a slight dip in housing prices for them to be upside down, a 5% dip in pricing, and it started to snowball. We're in a very different world right now. We've never had so much equity in housing. The average amount of money that people have, in appreciation in their homes, and the debt ratio is very low. And the people that have these loans are credit worthy, as defined by, the Federal Reserve. So we don't have that risky speculative buyer that we had back in the early 2000s. And that was one of the primary things that kind of pricked that bubble back in the early 2000s. The other thing that we need to talk about is inventory. So it's really housing, it's supply and demand. And historically, for the last 75 years in the US, when housing was strong, builders could go out and entitle land quickly. There was very little barriers. The zoning allowed it. There was not many hurdles to jump through. They built a ton of homes. And about every 7 to 10 years, they would overbuild the supply. There'd be too many homes on the market, and housing would go through about a 2 or 3 year correction, and then it would have another 7 to 10 year run. And oversupply is a big part of what will cause housing prices to flatten or to go down. And we are at nothing like we were back in the early 2000s or even mid 2000s. We saw inventory starting to increase in about 2005, about 2 years prior to the recession. And we're on the opposite trajectory right now. So, in 2007, we had 10 months of inventory on the market. We're at a month and a half right now. So what we're seeing right now is so fundamentally different than the early 2000s. It's hard to draw a direct comparable. And then the other thing, Steve, do you want to hit this one off, or do you want me to talk about this?
Absolutely.
The distressed and foreclosures.
Yeah, so as you can see on the chart, the number of foreclosures that are taking place in the market, are negligible compared to what there was. And clearly part of that has been the programs that were put into place, right? There were no foreclosures. People got into forbearance, and loans were able to be modified so that people wouldn't lose their homes. But we've emerged from that, and we've had charts in prior webinars. We should have all of those up on our site that you can go back and look and see how many people entered forbearance, how many people have worked out some type of loan modification. But at the end of the day, Brian, you mentioned it, a lot of these people that do own homes, even if they've gotten behind, they've had so much equity in their home that they're able to sell their house and get out of it without having to go through the foreclosure process or losing their home or doing a short sale like we saw in the mid 2000s. So it's just a completely different animal right now.
Yeah, so while we addressed a very big question in 2 or 3 slides, it's certainly not my sentiment that we're in a housing bubble. That's not to say that prices are forever going to go up, et cetera. But I believe that we have some fairly strong arguments and elements underpinning the pricing structure that we have right now. So, and the economists agree. And so this slide that I just pulled up is a poll of a lot of the experts from National Association of Realtors to Fannie Mae, CoreLogic, Zellman, Amy Zellman's she's a genius, talk about what they expect housing prices to be nationwide for 2022. And nobody's predicting a decrease in prices. And the average is 6.1%. That said, they put this together a couple months ago, and we're seeing appreciation 2 to 3x of this across most of the US, or at least that trajectory. So I think they're even being conservative on this. But this is what the experts are saying for 2022. We could obviously have a bigger discussion about what is 2023, 24, 25, what does the unwinding of inflation look like, et cetera. But nobody's expecting housing prices to go down this year as much as, I would kind of like in some markets. I want an easier entry point, on ramp for a lot of, especially first-time home buyers, but that's just not what we're seeing in the market. So we didn't quite get our 22 minutes, but we knocked out quite a bit. And Jamie, what I'd love for you to do is, if we got any questions or chat, let's bring that up now. And then if anyone's thinking of anything, throw it out there. And once again, I'm going to just invite everyone, if anyone has any interest in that Bend 101 event, I think it's going to be a really productive and beautiful discussion about what it means to be a Bendite and how to get back. And we're going to have that at the Tether Pavilion on April 12th. And I'll buy tickets for anyone who sends us an email.
So looking at questions, we have one from John. While housing prices are escalating, are real estate commissions increasing in parallel in the current market? Sure.
So let's talk about that. So real estate commissions obviously are as a percentage of the sales price of the house. So while assets, while the sales prices are higher, the gross commission dollars are generally higher as well. But what we are seeing is that there is a lack of inventory in the market. So we're kind of seeing a bifurcation, a split in representation right now, because there's a lot of agents that do this, for lack of a better term, more as a hobby than a profession. And even though the prices are high, there's very few homes to list or to sell, and the volume can actually be fairly low. And so there are some more desperate agents or discount brokers that will be taking commissions at a lower rate. But what we're seeing is we don't always see performance there. We've always seen a positive ROI and with our clients in being well represented with a full price commission group like ourselves. I'm kind of defending our business plan at this point, but what we've been able to do is execute sales in up markets, down markets, side markets, with the proper marketing strategy, and trying to discount that just really isn't usually in the best interest of the client. So while this market is bringing out a little bit more desperation and discounting from some agents, by and large, the professional agents in this industry have maintained the same commission structure. So they're not raising their commission structure, but it's just going up in parallel with some of these prices that we've seen. So do we have any other questions out there?
That looks to be about it for the questions. So I put a number of links in the chat for everyone. If you want to reference our past webinars, then there is a link to our webinars page. We just put out our most recent spring state of the market. And so I put a link to find that as well. And then our YouTube channel is full of all of our webinars and videos from Brian. And so you can find more info there. Don't hesitate to reach out to marketing@bendpropertysource.com for any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Steve. And thank you for all those that logged on. I recognize the majority of these names, so I appreciate your time today, and I hope it brought some value. You guys know how to reach out to us. We're always here for you. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.